guys, hope you're all well. I wanted to jump on today and say hello. It's been a little while since I posted, and I was just so busy in November and December moving across the country, and so I'm happy to say I've landed and I'm back. So this morning I was drinking coffee and reading into one of my favorite topics, which is Gnosticism, or Gnosis. And so I thought I would jump on and say a word or two about the mystical tradition, the tradition of mysticism, and kind of how I found my way into that tradition as a spiritual practitioner. So I will say that I grew up in the Christian tradition, which is a very traditional path in the States and in a lot of the places, a lot of the countries in the West. There is not a large tradition of mysticism or direct contact, direct, unmediated contact with the divine. Mostly in a organized religious path like Christianity. There's a sacred text, and the path is largely prescribed by leaders, and church governance, and it can be very, for some people it really works, but in my life, as I've said on this channel, I just had a spontaneous awakening in 2013 after many years of being an agnostic slash maybe atheist. I just didn't have any real strong feelings, or I didn't have a strong sense that there was a higher power, or another side. But then I had my awakening, and I just had a direct experience with the divine. And that happened for a number of reasons. It was my time, it was Saturn return. It was a really hard time in my life, and the divine came in really closely for me. And also I had built up a lot of spiritual evolution in past lives. Once I started being able to see psychically into my past lives, I had seen that I had been a mystic in multiple lifetimes. So it was relatively easy for me to unfold spiritually and to open and have like a really large Kundalini awakening. Not everybody's awakening is going to feel the same, but my path has been one that is decidedly mystical. And the reason I call myself a mystic is because I am practicing spirituality. I'm connecting with the divine realm outside of a church body, outside of a neat category of spirituality. I don't even really label the form of spirituality that I practice other than just calling it mysticism, because I am connecting to my higher power plainly. That's what I'm doing. And I just thought I would explain a little bit about how this process feels different from organized religion or from a prescribed spiritual practice like Christianity. The nice thing about something like an organized religion is that it's very clear and straightforward what the curriculum is, like what the moral curriculum is, what the standards and expectations of the seeker are. But the downside for me is that while these organized religions exist to facilitate spiritual experience, I didn't find that the connection to God, that I could form an authentic connection with God in my own way. Because the routes of connection to the divine were prescribed and handed down through the ages. They weren't like necessarily what worked for me. What works for me is sitting long enough and getting still enough to feel in my own heart where the barriers, where I've put up the walls to God, where I've put up the barriers to love in myself, I can sense my wounds whenever I'm sitting in quiet meditation and quiet reflection. I can sense a big form of love when I'm sitting quietly alone in solitude. And that's just not something that I can feel in a church. And I'm a very empathic person. I don't feel that sense of being alone. I don't feel a sense of not being observed when I'm in church or when I'm in communities. So there's something to be said for getting by yourself and sitting in meditation, sitting quietly in reflection and stilling your thoughts and stilling your mind and centering your focus and your awareness, basically shutting down the architecture of the thinking mind, the conscious mind, so that the subconscious or superconscious can come in, which is where you can sense the divine. That's the whole name of the game with mysticism. That's what you're doing in meditation. And there is, as I've said before, there's secular meditation, which is a therapeutic model just to feel less stress and to grow as a person, which is a great thing. But then there's sacred meditation, which is what I'm talking about. And it's when you sit quietly and still the mind. And somehow the soul, the realm of the soul is able to penetrate your psyche, and you can sense God, and you can sense your angels, the people and beings who are guarding you and protecting you and working with you to facilitate your spiritual evolution. So it's a short explanation, as to what mysticism is in my life. Um, I could go on. There's a lot of benefits from, sitting quietly. Honestly, I found that practicing mysticism, which is just a raw guerrilla form of spirituality, I found it to be the most honest path to take. It was on the solitary path as a mystic. I was able to kind of like be honest with myself and where my doubts were. Um, my doubts as to whether or not there was a higher power at all. I was free to relax into the possibility that there was no higher power at all. And that was actually extremely freeing, and it actually helped me clear some hurdles in my spiritual development that I wasn't able to clear in the church, because that's actually prohibitive. That's a thought that's actually not allowed or permissible. There's not a real tradition of skepticism in the church that I found. Actually, there are some traditions where it's more facilitated, like the Episcopalian church actually does pride itself in like allowing for free criticism, with the expectation that you'll eventually come back around, or you'll eventually find a stronger foundation from which to believe in God. So it's not true across the board, but for the most part, questioning and doubt is not really allowed. And so being able to just relax into the possibility that there was not a higher power, even after my spiritual awakening, was like a huge benefit to me. It was freeing, it was a license to authentically connect in the way that only I could, in the most intuitive way, in the way that reflected who I was as a soul, the most. If that's what I mean by authenticity, or an intuitive approach, is something that comes naturally from you, something that comes from your core being, your instinct. Really, as a mystic, you're always just following your nose. You're looking for truth. You're seeking realization. You're seeking to shed ignorance. You're pursuing higher truth. You're pursuing wisdom. You're pursuing Sophia. It can be called Gnosis, which is Gnosis, which is what that was the term I was saying earlier, Gnosticism. It's the knowledge and the experience of God. It's very different than the intellectual formation that happens in organized religion. Or organized religion, I love it for its scholasticism. Mysticism is really hard to study because it's more practice oriented. It's more about get in meditation, get in prayer, and see what happens. And whatever your experience is your experience. It's hard to study, frankly. Organized religion is, it has this beautiful tree of theology, and it can be an academic experience, but it's largely like a mental experience, I find. And while that has its place in the spiritual path and the spiritual life, I really think that what should come first is a genuine, raw, mystical experience, a raw connection that is true to you, a connection to God, that you have built yourself from scratch, that you have built in a way that reflects your true, genuine desire to meet God, right? I wish we saw more mysticism in the church, but frankly, I was reading into Gnosticism this morning, and a lot of like the early church fathers were Gnostics and believed in a personal experience of God. And then as the church grew in its bureaucracy, it started to take away people's ability to connect directly to God. And I think in this day and age, we're getting away from that, obviously, and it's such a good thing, because independent and sovereign spirituality is really, in my opinion, the most beautiful way to go. I have grown so much as a soul, and I've actually advanced the furthest as a soul through independent and sovereign spirituality, or what I call mysticism. So I did want to say hello and just recommend this book. I actually listened to Sam Harris's podcast called Waking Up. I think he actually calls it Making Sense now, but he had this guy on that mentioned this book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And this is a study of where religion and psychology meet. And it's basically an ethnography of mysticisms, of mystics, and in multiple religious traditions. So it's really interesting. And if you're curious about like the variety of mystical experiences, definitely check it out. And there's plenty of famous mystics in history. Joan of Arc comes to mind. The Buddha himself, I think probably Jesus too. These were beings who directly made contact with the divine realm in a powerful way. And that experience is available to all of us. When you get into meditation and you focus and dedicate to a path of meditation long enough, you'll start to see it's an experience that's meant for every soul. And what I said, Joan of Arc, Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint Catherine, both of those were in the Christian tradition. So there is this while I was saying I grew up in Christianity and it wasn't like a mystical experience, there have been some famous Christian mystics, but it can be dangerous in history, as a Christian, to declare that you've had a direct experience of God. I think even Joan of Arc was considered a heretic for saying so. So anyway, now that we're free to be open about these things, and we're free to explore them, frankly, I think we should. And I would love to know what you're finding in your own mystical experience. I know that part of life, my mysticism and my meditation is the richest part of my personal life, and so I recommend it. Well, I hope you guys are all doing well. I hope you had a great holiday, and let's talk again soon.